Paul Sullivan says, how can you support the military-industrial complex? I don't support the military-industrial complex. I support the ability of the United States to defend itself with state-of-the-art weapons. They're not the same thing. People are literally profiting from the murder and colonization of the third world, please. You know, Paul, I know this all these questions are all sarcastic or spoken in the name of a liberal. But let's just start with the idea of stealing from the third world, and we'll come back. I did a little look into this, and I took a look at the United States economy, and I looked at the economy of Djibouti, which is a poor country, and I looked at the GMP of Djibouti, which is, I think, $1 billion, $1.2 billion, something like that. And so basically, if the United States were to take all of its aircraft carriers and its giant death machine, and led by our oil companies, of course, if we took the giant American corporate death machine into Djibouti and didn't just drill some oil or take some stuff. If we went into Djibouti and we took every single thing that they made in Djibouti that year, we took every single thing. We took all the crops, we took all the oil, all the minerals, we took all of it. We took all of it from Djibouti with our military death machine. It would run the U.S. economy for 2.5 hours. And if we took the bottom 20 countries, it would run the U.S. economy for probably 2 or 3 days. And if we took the bottom 50 out of 150 countries, it might run the U.S. economy for a week. So this idea that this rich, powerful nation is rich and powerful because we stole from the third world is 100% precisely backwards. We pump money into the third world. India is richer today, because of Americans paying money largely through things like phone banks. China, I did a documentary on China in the year 2000, and I couldn't cut footage from the team that went out there in 2000 versus the team that was out there in 1996, because in 96 they were wearing Mao jackets, and in 2000 they all had cell phones. Couldn't cut the two pieces of video together. China became rich overnight from the Stone Age because of American wealth went into China because we bought their products. This idea that we're stealing from the third world is absolute madness. They don't make anything. There's nothing to steal. When you look at the third world, what do you see? When you look at Africa or South America, these dirt poor villages, what do you see? In other words, if you take an outpost of Western imperialism, let's say Santa Monica, California, and you take a pristine part of the Brazilian jungle, and let's say a village out in the middle of the jungles of Africa, what do you see? Well, when you get to, and not even the jungles of Africa, some town in Africa, Nairobi even or something, what do you see in Nairobi? Well, you see people wearing cotton clothing that is mass-produced on looms with cell phones and AK-47s and trucks. And when you go through Santa Monica, you don't see people wearing banana leaves, and you don't see people living in thatched huts. In other words, it's Western wealth, know-how, technology, and everything else is pushed out into the third world and benefits them enormously. And when people say, oh, this tribe is untouched, it's an untouched, pristine tribe. Oh, it's so wonderful, isn't it so wonderful? What a terrible, terrible, horrible, horrible, horrible crime that Western man has contaminated these poor, lovely people with his presence. What they're really saying is, look at these natives living in a grass hut in the middle of the Amazon wearing T-shirts that say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on it and a pair of Nike shorts. And what these liberals are really saying, or these progressives are really saying is, isn't that awful? Isn't it awful that we are out there giving people this stuff? Why aren't they wearing leaves like they should be? Well, have you ever worn leaves? And why don't you wear leaves, by the way, up in the hills of Hollywood and Santa Monica? Why aren't you wearing leaves or banana leaves for underwear? Why aren't you wearing leaves or wearing authentic African bush skirts? Why? Because they're bloody god-awful uncomfortable, that's why. They're filled with parasites and they're uncomfortable, they're horrible, and they're primitive. And so when you see people in cotton clothing in the third world, and you think it's a catastrophe, they're wearing the same clothes you wear, and they're wearing them for the same reasons, because they're well-made and they're comfortable. But you can't have that. It's just part of the anti-humanity hatred that these people have up in the Hollywood Hills and San Francisco. Oh, I wish we hadn't, gotten in there and polluted them with our cotton clothing. I wish they were still wiping their butts with twigs and using drums to communicate. It's this racism and this anti-human disgust and disgrace with people. They want people to live like zoo animals. It's like they want people to live like zoo animals. It's like they feel the same way they do about the disappearance of the giraffe or the rhinoceros. I want to see authentic people with grass skirts. I don't. Why should they have to wear grass skirts for my amusement? I don't want to wear a grass skirt. I could afford a grass skirt if I wanted to, and I don't wear one because they're god-awful, horrible ways to live. I want to live in some comfort. And if the only comfort these people get is a cotton T-shirt and a pair of shorts, then for God's sakes, let them have some cotton T-shirts and shorts. My God, it's unbelievable. Oh, we stole it from the third world, the military income, profiting from the murder and colonization of the third world. There was a period when the British Empire, which was an actual empire, did in fact militarily take resources from the third world and bring it back to Great Britain. And it wasn't just the British, the French did it, and the Spanish built their entire rise and fall around it. When the Spanish came to the New World, they didn't really mostly come to settle and farm and find a frontier and start off on their own the way they did in North America. Now, the Spanish basically came to the New World for gold, and they brought armies and cannons, and they killed the local natives for gold. And they shipped so much gold out of the New World to the Old World. And for 100 years, Spain was ascendant because they were stealing gold. And what it did was it made Spain into what is still the poor man of Europe. They never developed any of the means of making new wealth because they had such easy access to stealing somebody else's wealth until they ran out. And then they're dumb. They're boned. They deserve to be boned. And frankly, if you want to really run this thing off the rails for a little bit, why do people cross the border of Mexico? Why aren't Americans crossing into Canada? Why is it the border of Mexico that's so important? Why is that the place where all the action is? Well, because the border between the United States and Mexico is the border between North America, which was settled primarily by English-speaking Protestants, and South America and Central America, which was settled by primarily Spanish-speaking Catholics. And it's the difference between these two cultures is what makes one part of the New World work better than any place in the world, and the other one a catastrophic failure. Canada and America, we don't see Canadians climbing over the fence to get into America or vice versa because Canada works. Canada works because it's an English-speaking Protestant country. That's how it was settled. It was settled with that work ethic. It was settled with that idea of wealth generation. And South America, from Mexico south, the Mexican border with the U.S. south, is based on limited amounts of wealth, redistribution of wealth, stealing, corruption, and so on. So there you go. And it's pretty clear. And so, this business about us murdering and colonizing the third world, America doesn't do that. We have bases in many countries, and we pay a large amount of money for those bases. And when the countries decide they don't want us anymore, then we leave. And when you look at the amount of money that the U.S. puts into a place like Djibouti, for example, with that one base we have there, we're making people, we're giving them money to spend. It'd be nice if we were giving them jobs that they or teaching them how to generate wealth, but we're not doing that. But they're at least getting money. The wealth flows from the West into the third world, not the other way around, and it hasn't for 150 years now. So get with the program, you miserable low-life left-wing losers. The military-industrial complex is a slightly different issue. It needs to be said that nuclear submarines and fifth-generation stealth fighters are not something you can make in a garage, although you probably can get a lot closer than what we have now. To some degree, you need conglomerations of large corporations, lots of money, highly trained technical staffs, research, development, all this other stuff that make up the Lockheeds and the Boeings and the Northrops and Grummans and all these other companies. All of those companies I generally support, by the way. I think Boeing is a national treasure. I think Lockheed is a national treasure. I think General Dynamics is a national treasure. I think they're all absolutely essential. I think they're doing the most important technological work in the world, but I don't like the way they go about procuring things, and that's not their fault because they don't have coercive power. It's the government's fault. It's the way the government buys stuff from them. Cost-plus kind of contracts and things like that are just designed to promote graft and corruption and delays. If you say to somebody, we want a new fighter plane, they say, great, that's going to be $500 billion. You say, okay. And if you run over, well, we're just going to keep paying you. So if it turns out being $800 billion, you're going to get what it costs, plus we're going to give you a percentage. That tells the person who's selling the airplanes, run up the cost, make it take as long as possible, and the more we delay and the more we go over budget, the more money we make. If, on the other hand, the United States says, I need a fifth-generation fighter aircraft, and they say, we will buy 500 billion of them. However, we're going to buy 500 billion of them, and that's it. Then you get back to where you were back in the 60s when you had, 13, 15 aerospace companies, and Grumman's got a plane, and Northrop's got a plane, North American's got a plane, Lockheed's got a plane, Boeing's got a plane, Douglas has a plane. All these companies are competing with each other, trying to figure out how can we get the most capability at the lowest cost because we want that money. Now it's like we already have the money. The more we delay, the more money we get. Take that out of the way, get rid of cost-plus contract buys, and you don't have much of a military-industrial complex anymore. You're kind of back to the kind of competition we had that got us from the Wright brothers to the SR-71 in, roughly 60 years. And then in the next 60 years, nothing. Slower. There we go. David Holy says, I walked into a lively discussion between two clerks at my local CVS. They were talking about how miserable rich people seem to be all the time. Gee, I wonder if that would have to do with somebody constantly vilifying them and trying to tax their money away. Anyway, one of them actually said, why would you want to be rich if you're going to be miserable all the time? I'd rather be poor. Yes, she really said that. I guess the question is, how do you debate someone with logic like that? I just muttered that I'd rather be miserable in a penthouse than a flop house, paid for my things and left. The more I think about this stuff, and all this stuff is new to me, I didn't come into this business fully equipped for all these arguments. I started reasoning and reading and learning and talking and hearing from people like you and arguing. And so all of my positions evolve. None of them have changed radically, but they evolve and get refined. And the more we talk about wealth and the more we talk about money, and the more the world has changed in the last 20 years, the more we get back to what I started off the show with, which is this glorification of poverty as a moral good, that poor people are morally advantageous and that rich people are fundamentally evil. This business, to directly answer your question, David, the idea that rich people are miserable is a myth that is generated to make poor people complacent and willing to tolerate their lot in life. They look at rich people and they see all these material benefits, and as long as they're being told all the time, and they are being told all the time, they're being told in movies, they're being told all the time that being rich is somehow bad and awful and miserable, and you lose your connection to reality and so on, then poverty becomes a little more bearable and becomes a little more tolerable and acceptable and manipulatable. But I've known people, and you're looking at one right now, who've been very poor, and I mean very poor. I don't like to get too much into this because I don't want to sound like I'm wallowing, because this idea that the fact that I was once poor somehow gives me moral stature that I wouldn't have if I would have been rich my whole life. The argument is the argument. The facts are the facts. The data is the data. It doesn't matter where I come from. But the fact of the matter is, I can connect to this because I was actually there. I was, when I was in college, we just didn't have money to eat. I was 6'1". I weighed 119 pounds. And I weighed 119 pounds for 8-9 years. I remember clearly when I got up to 135, and it was only because I had enough money to eat. I remember buying $50 worth of groceries at one time. That was a big event. Remember that very well. But it's not more fun to be poor. In fact, on some level, depending on your line of work, it's virtually, and I'm going to be very careful about how I say this, it is certainly possible, but it's harder to become a fully realized human being if you're in a state of absolute poverty. A lot would depend on what it is you're actually trying to do with your life and what your goals are. It's possible if you're, for example, if you're I don't mean a teacher, if you're an academic, if you're a scholar, and history, for example, Chaucer, let's say, is your passion in life, then you can become as fully realized as you want to be and really be quite a poor person. But generally speaking, if most of your time and effort is spent worrying about money, it's not a question of, hey man, I'm going skiing this weekend in Switzerland. I'm not talking about that. If you spend so much of your life worrying about money and your amount of resources are so tight that you no longer have the ability to set some of them aside in order to escape this resource trap downstream, then you're in a state of real psychological distress. And I can connect to this, like I said, very well. I remember, like I said, 2009, 10, somewhere in the 8 or 9, the first time I had consistently 4 figures in a bank account. Well, that meant that everything I was doing up until that point was hand to mouth. Hand to mouth. I couldn't build this office hand to mouth. I couldn't I got my credit score today. My credit score when I applied for credit when I got back from Australia, my uncle pulled me out of here because I was failing so catastrophically. He took me to Australia for 3 months, and when I got back, I had $40 in my pocket, and that's all. I got a bike. A friend of mine, gave me a bike, and I lived in a friend's garage. I got a job. I got an advance on the job. I lived in a motel. I worked at editing job, and I worked another job as well. Eventually, I got a little used car, and eventually I got an apartment. But when I went looking for the apartment from the motel, and I'd been in that motel for about 5 weeks, just big enough to put the bike in. I had to leave my cats with my mom, and it was just horrible, just disgraceful. But I clearly remember going to apply at an apartment, and it's one of the first time this happened to me, and it certainly wasn't the last. And sitting there and filling out the application, and having people say, "I'm sorry, no, we can't let you in here." Really? Yeah. You might want to check this other apartment complex. It's for people with really low credit scores. I went to the other apartment complex, and I overheard this, and they said, "You're going to think I'm making this up, but I'm not." And I think this would have been about 1998, I want to say. And I overheard them say, I got to make a call. This is at the second place. The first place just laughed me out of there. And I had the money to pay the rent, but they laughed me out of there. I went to the second place, and they said, "Yeah, I don't know. What do we do?" Because this was low, this kind of place you went. We had no credit. I said, "Yeah, well, it's actually, I think it's below 300. And I didn't think it was possible. Something like, or below 350 or something. It was like below the bottom of the scale. The person didn't know what to do. I didn't know you could go below the bottom of the scale. I thought what the definition of a scale was, but nope. I got my credit score report 2 days ago, and I just cracked 700, which is how fortunate, huh? How fortunate I am that I have a 700 credit score, when most of my life my credit score was 500 or less. Well, there's nothing fortunate about it. The reason I got a 701 credit score now is because for the last 10 years of my life, and certainly the last 6 years of my life, I've been working like an animal. I just work like crazy. I don't turn anything down. If there's a speaking engagement, I'll take it. I just take it all. And that's just a choice. I just got tired of living that way. I just got tired of it. I just was tired of being embarrassed, and tired of being ashamed, and tired of being held back from the things I wanted to do. And when I say started working, it wasn't like all of this was, this groovy stuff. I was working as editor, and I was working in it's just, I had a skill set there, but it wasn't like, gee, this is a dream job. And I was living in crummy apartments, horrible apartments. And I remember so clearly going down Lancashire Boulevard. I remember this like it was yesterday, because it feels like it was yesterday. Going down Lancashire Boulevard, and you'd find a couple places there that had retread tires. And I would, when my tires were showing, when they're showing the cord through there, I would go to one of these tire places, and you would get out of the car, and you'd look around, and you'd pick the ones that seemed to have the most tread. I think I got 4 tires for my Honda CRX, probably $40 for $60 for 4 tires, something like that. And so on some level, I'm only saying this to tell you that, look, I'm not naive enough to say that everybody can just do this, because I know I have a unique set of abilities. But I worked for this unique set of abilities. I really did. I really worked for them. And so hard work trumps big, bright intellect every day. Every day. I was the same guy, had the same brain, had the same, I almost said I had the same personality, but I had a much worse personality. And I was broke for 30 years. Broke for 30 years. So what happened? Well, what happened was I just decided I just got tired of being broke, and it was time to start working and getting on with it, and working harder than I had been. I used to play video games. I used to just do, just like bored all the time. So the idea of being bored now is beyond my comprehension. I can't comprehend having enough time to be bored anymore. And it's just a question of getting down to business and going to work. And all of the things that I had done, I managed to find a way to capitalize on. And so that's basically why I'm here. That's why I have this office. I have this office because I work very hard. And apparently this show provides some value to people. And through various intricate forms of webs, this turns into actual income for me. But I could have gone back to school. I could have improved my education. I could have done any number of things. But what I really did was I just decided to work harder. A lot harder. A lot harder. And sure enough, you see rewards from that. And there was a point I was going to make about this. What was it? Doggone it. It was really kind of cool too. I guess it had something to do with that, with the happiness. But now I have the ability to there are two things I will say about this. Obviously, standard of living increase is nice, but one thing I've learned, we're really getting a little off the rails here, but that's okay because we're about done with the questions anyway. When you are really, really poor for a long time, I mean, broke poor, you develop, most people do, I certainly did, you develop a very, very number of bad habits. And one of them for me was that whenever you would find any excess money, you'd go and buy something because you got so little. You actually got to buy so little that once you had, like $300 or something, I'm going to get a new computer, this or what, and you kind of splurge spend. And I found to my utter amazement that about 2 years ago, I moved into my new apartment and I got the Camaro. And after I got the new apartment and the new car, I realized to my absolute amazement that I didn't need anything more than that right now. It doesn't mean it's my end apartment and it doesn't mean it's my end car, but it does mean that I don't have to go buy things to have momentary periods of happiness. And I've been so much more responsible with my money because I wasn't using money as a drug in that sense. I wasn't binging on little bits of excess cash. The other day I was at the Apple store and my iPhone 5, it's a first model 5, crapped out, and they could fix the thing, and there was a line, and the 6 came out, and there's a lot to the 6 I would like, and I could afford the 6, and I would like, kind of nice cutting edge. But I thought, is there anything on this phone you have to have? No. Is there anything on this phone that's going to end up making you more money than it costs? No. Then fix the 5. I don't have to have it. I don't need it. It's not like I have to have it for emotional reasons. And this is the kind of thing I think that most people are talking about. And I remember where I was kind of going with this thing, with this the rich being unhappy thing, because while it is true that it is much more comfortable being rich than it is being poor, it is also true that some genuine kernel of this, the poor being miserable, does exist. And that kernel has got nothing to do with the wealth. It's got to do with the perception of what the wealth will do for you. And that's why on some level, when you actually get to meet Hollywood people and actors and writers and producers and directors, some of the worst people in the world, and I ought to know because I was one of them. I really was one of them. Well, some of the most immoral, narcissistic, self-centered, unhappy, miserable, mean-spirited swine. And I was one of them. And I was fortunate that I was able to get my head in shape, and then the money happened. Because I think when you look at the people who have these horrible excesses, Alec Baldwin comes to mind first, is a great example. Here's Alec Baldwin, who's an extremely handsome guy. In the shadows, maybe the handsomest man I'd ever seen. I mean, he's a really strikingly good-looking guy, great actor, top of his profession. And it's true for a lot of these people. And they've got fame, they've got all the sex they could possibly want, they've got money, because the sex comes with the fame and the money. And the reason that is such a curse to them is because then they realize that everything that they thought would fix them doesn't. And then life is miserable. I get that sense about Bill Maher very much. I get that sense about Michael Moore very much. Never got that sense about Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck. But I get that sense about Bill Maher and Michael Moore. Bill Maher especially strikes me as a guy who does a lot of drugs, does a lot of hookers, does a lot of, things to fill that emptiness inside him. It's never going to get filled. And I think that's the one thing I will say about poor people being happy and rich people being miserable, is that poor people have to understand, if you're going to be happy and poor, you have to make it your own. You have to make it out of human connections. You have to make it out of the important things. You have to make it about your relationships with people. And to the degree that people sacrifice human relationships in order to chase wealth, they are in fact miserable people. And they're very empty people, and their lives have no meaning because they have no human connection. I remember where I was off the rails with this, and I'll just say this. The best part about suddenly, not suddenly, over 10 years, starting to make some money is twofold. First of all, this utterly surprised me. It knocked me on my butt, to be perfectly honest with you. But the first time I wrote a paycheck instead of took one was, just tears me up just thinking about it. It It was a transcendental experience to sign somebody else's paycheck on the front. That is an amazing feeling. It's an amazing feeling. Absolutely. You feel like a Superman. You feel like a man. And that's part of it. And the other part of it is I find that while I don't have any desire to go splurge on myself or do anything really for myself, but the ability to help people you care about and be able to really help them, get them to take a breath. Because I've been in situations where I've spent 10 years where I didn't know if I'd be able to make next month's rent. And when that anxiety gets so high that you can't breathe anymore, people have come in over the course of my life 3 or 4 or 5 times and rescued me and saved me from this. And to be able to do that for somebody else is a profoundly moving experience, and absolutely is the best thing about working hard and making money, is the ability to connect to that kind of anxiety about money, and without being asked, to go in there and help the people you care about. Just breathe. Not buy them out of their trouble or anything, but just get them some resources so that they can breathe and have a moment's peace. So, but it's the peace. Hey, we're good. Thanks, buddy. Actually, we're okay today. We're fine. Thanks. Thank you. This guy's terrific. I just love this guy. The guy who does the janitorial work here is a sweet, hard-working, wonderful guy, and really terrific, great guy. A lot of personality, and so that's really it. It's easier to be rich than it is to be poor. There's no question about it. And I remember. And the final thing too is, used to be that rich people were evil, and because for almost all of human history, the people who were rich were dukes and barons and earls, and they were mostly second, third, fourth, eighth generation people who'd never had hardship, never been poor. To some degree, maybe they have to be good at war or whatever, but you go back to Robin Hood, you're talking about people stealing from the peasants, some way these landowners who owned the people, really, honestly. In cases like that, this is where the left is really so mired, is they've got this Robin Hood sense of justice in a world where Robin Hood's been gone for 500 years. There's not this world where you're locked into poverty for the rest of your life, and certain people have the ability to just take things from poor people because it's just nuts. It's just nuts. I will invite that janitor onto the show. Dave Big Booty. That's Big Booty. That's the third great suggestion from you tonight. That'd be fun. It'd be fun. Well, I'll talk to him about it and see what he has to say. Maybe we'll see if we can have him sit down and be a guest. His English isn't super great, but he'd have a lot of interesting things to say, and I certainly enjoy talking with him. I really do. I love it every time he comes in. I'm usually here, and we sit and chat and try to help him if I can. Anyway, so let's move on. We got 4 to go.